Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Sunderlash Farmhouse. Once again, we're having another great event. Today it's the Midwest Tool Collectors Association, and they brought some wonderful exhibits of old tools and the way it was in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, and very authentic. I've walked from each one of their tables and fallen in love with old tools.
This is Norman Walzer, and I'm working as an 1830s, 1840s shoe and boot maker. And essentially what you had in the 1830s and 40s was shoes and boots that were neither right or left. And the reason for that was that in earlier times, in the late 1500s, high heels became popular. And when you make a pair of shoes, you have to start with a wooden last. And this last has to represent the size of the foot, obviously. And if you have three heel sizes, you'd have to have three lasts. If you had a right and a left, you'd have to have six lasts then for each size. And small shoemakers just couldn't afford to have that many lasts. They were all hand carved. They were hand carved until about 1820s when Blanchard developed a lathe, a reproducing lathe that made lasts by machine. So prior to the 1820s, you don't have very many rights and lefts. The basic kind of shoe was a straight last, looking like this. One shoe would fit both feet, and it's an upper that's wrapped around a midsole, and it's put together with wooden pegs. And so this would be a shoe halfway through, and this shoe complete would look like this. So this is essentially about 150 pegs in the bottom of a shoe of the foot, and with a stacked up heel. And so this particular shoe would probably sell about for $1.50 a pair in the 1830s, but recognize that you made about $1 a day. So if you thought of $10 an hour today, that'd be $80 times a day and a half would be $120. So this kind of shoe would cost about $120 in today's terms in the 1830s. But it's the simplest type of construction. A more complex construction was a shoe that looked like this. And this is a lady's shoe. It's halfway done. And what I'm doing is sewing a welt around the outside of the shoe. And this shoe, when complete, would look like this. So rather than having pegs in the bottom of the sole, you still have pegs in the heel usually, but you have a sole that's, if you had a tear or something or a worn out part in the bottom of the sole, then you could cut behind that hole and you could just strip off the sole and replace with a half a sole. So this was pretty much a more modern construction. In terms of the types of tools that were used, when I do work, I'm primarily using tools that actually were in existence before the Civil War. So this particular tool was made prior to the Civil War. It's a head knife, and essentially it's used to round leather or to skive it off or to do whatever you need. And this pretty much is a standard leather working tool, and it's pretty much shows up in shoemaking, harness work, and any kind of leather activity. Another type of tool, this is called a draw knife, and it's not so much used in the shoe industry, in harness industry or saddle industry, and this is for pulling to make a strap or a reins for a harness or something like that. So this tool is making a belt, so that's pretty much what it was used for. Another tool that was of some interest was a bone shave or a bone creaser, and this tool essentially is made out of bone, and you draw a line in a leather or a crease of leather or something like that using it. Another tool was to make stitches, so where you had a mark where you wanted to sew, and basically this would be a stitching wheel that essentially could be, you could have whatever size you want, and this was probably, again, made prior to the Civil War. One of the things that's kind of interesting when you work with leather, when you make shoes in this period anyhow, is that what we're sewing with is called a boar bristle. And this is a hog hair that is wrapped onto a piece of thread, and you have one on each side of the string. So you make your hole with an awl, something like this, and then you make the hole, then you go through and you take your thread, and you're basically going back and forth using this boar bristle. And so it's kind of a little different type of construction, but it's, this is pretty much the common technique. A pegging plane. So when you made shoes, you used little wooden pegs, something like this. So these are made out of maple, and you put them into the bottom of the sole. It swells up, as does the leather. So they pretty much stay tight, so the peg expands. And after the 1830s and 40s, you could probably buy them from a shoe finder somewhere. But one of the ways that they made them was called a pegging plane. And this plane has grooves in it and ridges. You would put that plane against a piece of maple, and this would be the end. You would go this way and then this way, and these create the points on the piece of wood. And then I think I have another piece here. If you go the other way, like this, then you can carve out the pegs. So this generates the pegs, and then you can break them off, and this is where the pegs came from. The other things that we're doing, a pair of boots here. This would be a pretty standard boot for the 1930s and 40s, and the boot is made inside out, and it has welts on the inside. You put it on a lamp, peg the soles, like we're doing here, and so you have, again, about 150 pegs in the bottom of a sole, neither right or left. But this would be a pretty typical 1830s or 1840s 40s boots. This particular pair of shoes I drew and copied basically from the steamboat Arabia that went down in 1856 on the Missouri River by Kansas City, and there's an excellent museum out there. So this is pretty much what shoes in that period looked like. A little bit interesting because you could sit with your shoe, and then you could hammer in the pegs or whatever you were doing, lay the outer sole on, and so you had both hands free to work with the shoe. And this tool, it's all hand forged, as you can see on both sides, and it's definitely made prior to the Civil War. And most everything that I use, this box, we think came out of about 1810 or 1812, are really authentic tools made in the pre-Civil War period, and that's pretty much what we're trying to show. The hammer would have looked like in the pre-Civil War period. So that's pretty much how we try to put things together, and we try to have an educational event so people can see how things were done.